Hello and welcome to a brand new Arseblog Arsecast right here on arseblog.com. How are you? Hope you're well. Thank you very much indeed, as always, for being here. It's Thursday around midday as I'm recording this, and there isn't long left in the transfer window. There are a few bits and bobs happening, of course, some players departing, Fabio Vieira, Aaron Ramsdale, Eddie Nketiah. But is anybody coming in? I don't know. We'll have to wait and see. There isn't a lot of time to get anything done. And I'm also conscious of the fact that, things move quickly in the transfer window. So the more I talk here, the more out of date this podcast could become by the time you actually hear it. So I'm going to truncate this intro and just get on with the show, because we're going to have a chat about the situation at the club with 36 hours thereabouts to go in the transfer window in terms of incomings, potentially in terms of departures, and what, if anything, we expect to happen before the deadline tomorrow night at 11 p.m. So look, let's just get on with the show. I've got a couple of guests to chew the fat with me. First up, it is the man from East Lower. Hello, Jim.
Good day to you.
And we have Andrew Allen here as well. Hello, Andrew.
Hello.
Let's begin with some of the departures that have been happening this week. Jim, I'll start with you and Aaron Ramsdale. Looks like he's off to, at the time of recording anyway, he looks like he's off to Southampton. Fee in the region of £20 million, could rise to £25 million, all add-ons included. If we get there, I think there's a bonus if Southampton stay up in the Premier League. And I think first and foremost, that is going to be the big challenge for Aaron Ramsdale this season. I think he could be a busy boy on the South Coast.
Yeah, although it's not like it's an experience he hasn't had before, is it? So, maybe that was in the thinking of Southampton. And I feel really sad about this transfer, if I'm honest, because I think, with the greatest respect to Southampton, it feels like a bit of a downward step. Everything's a downward step for Arsenal, obviously, let's be clear about that. But I don't know, I think he needs to play, and I get that. And he'll, like you say, he'll be really busy. AirPods falling out. Yeah, I feel really sorry. I feel sad about it personally, just because I think at the time when the season before Raya came, it was so incredibly popular, but also really, really good, and a little bit emotional. We all know that, but I think the way his career at Arsenal, having got the new deal and all that kind of stuff, I just think he probably wasn't expecting it to go in this direction, and but I wish him good luck, obviously, and he'll get a fantastic reception. I mean,
just sticking with you, it is sort of an example of how things can change very quickly in football. That 1 minute you're pretty much assured of your position as Arsenal's number one, the next there's a new guy in and you're sitting on the bench and you're playing second fiddle, and ultimately, I think we knew when Raya became established as the number one that there was only one real solution for Aaron Ramsdale. So football can be cutthroat, and I think this is a really good example of that.
It makes you realise as well that a new deal is not necessarily confirmation that you're the best. It's often an insurance policy for the club. And so, it was only a few months after that Raya came in, so you kind of slightly question it. But as long as we're getting the same amount of money back, then I suppose it's a deal that's acceptable for us. But you can understand why he'd be a bit miffed.
Andrew, how are you feeling about this one? Because I think when Ramsdale was first touted as a signing for Arsenal and the fee that was doing the rounds, there was a lot of skepticism, and I think understandably so. Some of it obviously went a bit far, but you could understand why people were maybe a bit concerned about how much we were paying for a goalkeeper who'd been on teams that had been relegated 2 seasons in a row, whatever it was. But he came in and established himself very quickly, became very popular very quickly, won people over, not just with his personality, I think, but with his performances. I think in the mists of time, I think it's become a thing that everyone loved Aaron Ramsdale because he's this kind of character and he has this personality that everyone can connect to. And I think he was the right personality at the right time for the football club. But, despite the fact that he had some issues and mistakes along the way, as every player does and every goalkeeper does, really, what made him popular and what made people take Aaron Ramsdale to their hearts was the quality of the performances he put in.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost easy to forget that he was voted into the PFA Players Team of the Year for the 22-23 campaign, right? And you don't do that unless you've performed on the pitch. That he was then usurped in that same team by Raya, as he was at Arsenal, kind of tells you everything about the circumstances in which he finds himself in. I mean, it's like Jim, I'm quite sad about it. I mean, it kind of underlines the ruthlessness of Mikel Arteta, but it also showcases maybe that we need that ruthlessness to get to the top. I think even though in the 22-23 season when he was at the very top of his game, he still had the occasional gaffe in him. There was moments where individual errors would potentially cause the team problems. And I think Arteta's obviously looked at that and decided, well, that's something that we can upgrade. It's not something you or I or anybody else really spotted that summer, 2 months after he'd been given that new deal. But obviously something was there. And I think in this world of fine margins and marginal gains and whatnot, he's paid the price. I mean, there were some other bits and bobs. I think the manner in which he interacts with the crowd, I don't think massively played in Ramsdale's favour in the long term. I think it was great as an Arsenal fan watching him wind up other supporters, but I can see as a manager why you might look at the situation and go, we need calm heads, and actually winding up opposition supporters during the heat of the moment isn't necessarily exactly what your defence and the team needs, can go against you sometimes. So I think there's things there that he'll potentially learn from. Ultimately, was it a good deal? Wasn't it a good deal? I mean, we're getting decent-ish money from Southampton at a moment in the transfer window when I'd actually given up on the idea of us getting that money. I just assumed he'd go on loan at this point because I wasn't sure there was a buyer out there that would spend 20 million quid. If you think about it, we spent an extra £7 million bringing him in, but we've had pretty good value for money out of him for 2 seasons, 3 seasons. I'm just kind of curious to see what we do with that money and how we fill that void, because in my mind, we had 2 of the best goalkeepers in the league, albeit one on the bench most of the time, but there was a security in knowing that. It does feel like there might be a bit of a drop-off, at least in the short term, even if we bring in this Juan Garcia guy from Espanyol. But let's see. Yeah,
we'll come back to the potential options and what we might do there. But just sort of going back to Ramsdale, Jim, certain things, the way you could say he was unconventional at times in the way that he spoke about his job. This idea that in order to keep focused on the game, he needed to distract himself in a way with those crowd interactions. I mean, I've never really heard a player talk like that before. Like you hear players talk all the time about focus. I've got to focus on the game, and a big part of a goalkeeper's job is being, at a club like Arsenal, at a team like Arsenal who are good, is that you're going to be maybe idle for long periods of a game, but then as soon as you're required to switch on, you need to be able to switch on. And I do wonder if that. Those admissions on his part perhaps fed into some doubts that maybe Mikel Arteta had, maybe some of the coaching staff had, I don't quite know. And just sort of on the way the whole Raya Ramsdale thing played out last season, I think Arteta's been a brilliant communicator since he arrived at the club, but I do think that in this particular case, what he said about that situation and the way that he might use goalkeepers and substitute goalkeepers, I think that made the drama of it, if you like, ripple on for much longer than it needed to.
Yeah, it did. But I guess it's quite hard to explain 2 months after giving someone a new contract why you no longer want him without coming up with something. And I think he got that wrong. But I mean, Ramsdale's, if you think about it, the goalkeeping position is the home of the unconventional. He's not the only one, a goalkeeper who's slightly offbeat, and his history is littered with them. And I imagine that for outfield players, the whole focus thing is slightly easier because you're involved more. So yeah, it is tricky, but also, goalkeepers can be a little bit, they're the ones that put the body on the line far more than other players. And I think just mentally, and the kind of people that become goalkeepers can be a little bit unconventional as a result. So I don't think it's, to admit that you struggled to focus and you did other things to focus I don't think that was held against him particularly. But I think what Andrew said was maybe right, that wasn't necessarily viewed by the club or by Arteta as perhaps the greatest thing you need when you want calmness in your team. But he certainly paid the price for it. But I think he'll do. I think he'll do really well at Southampton, and I think he was one of those players. When he did come in last year at Arsenal, he didn't look great, but he like a lot of players needs to play, to focus, and to show his best side. And he never really, unfortunately, got the chance to do that last season. So obviously needs to happen.
Yeah, confidence is obviously a huge thing for players, Andrew. Ramsdale strikes me as somebody who, you've got the guys you need to kick up the arse. You've got the guys who need an arm around their shoulder. He feels like more the arm around the shoulder kind of a guy, and certainly got that when he first came to the club under Mikel Arteta, who was very protective of him, protective of the decision to bring him in. And, some of that was to do with the reaction to what Arsenal were doing. And then when it went the other way, I think we could see, in the rare times that he got to play last season, that lack of confidence, not feeling the love, if you like, played into the performances, because he was coming in difficult circumstances, obviously, because at that point everybody knew Raya was the number one. There was a cup game against Brentford, league games against Brentford, and that was basically all he had.
Yeah, I think knowing that he was going to have to play those games and that there was a build-up and everyone was talking about it in the week, 2 weeks before, just put the spotlight on him even more. And, it wasn't quite the same as Raya picking up an injury and him being chucked in and just having to kind of get back into it on instinct. There was this sense of, what's he going to be like? Is he going to be able to, to react? And you could just see the nervousness coursing through his veins in those, particularly the two league games in the Brentford league games. I think away from home, there was one moment where he had a horrendous throw out, didn't he, which nearly resulted in Brentford scoring. And then obviously at home, there was the back pass he received. He took too long, and then the ball was sort of in the back of the net before he even realised it. And then, at the same time, he still produced an incredible save in that second game at the Emirates from Toney, which I think underlined exactly why you would want someone like Ramsdale in your team. I mean, he is a fantastic shot stopper. But, for all the WhatsApp debates between fans over the course of the first month of the season or so, it was pretty clear by the end of the season why Raya was the guy who was chosen, right? I mean, his crossing, claiming ability, his distribution stats, they all surpass anything that Ramsdale had achieved in an Arsenal shirt. And ultimately, Raya claimed 16 clean sheets in not a full season, obviously won over his peers. The team as a whole looked far more solid, particularly that during the run-in. There was no, while Raya had a couple of hiccups as well, earlier in the season against Luton, he seemed to park those pretty quickly. He certainly didn't carry the distress of those mistakes. And by the end of the season, you just couldn't look past him. He was great. So, look, I think it's the right decision. Whether we would have done it this way around, the handing him the new contract, Ramsdale, last year, and all the noise that went with that, and the fact that he was sort of proclaiming he'd happily be Arsenal's goalkeeper for the next 10 years, the rest of his career and stuff. I mean, all of that kind of, it just underlines how quickly football can change. Yeah.
Jim, the fact that we have let Ramsdale go with, 48 hours more or less, before the end of the window, we're obviously talking a little bit closer to that, but it does suggest that Arsenal are confident that they can bring in a replacement, because as it stands, David Raya is the only senior goalkeeper. Carl Hayne has gone out on loan. The young boy Tommy Setford has come in from Ajax. We don't quite know how ready he is. There are links to Espanyol's Joan Garcia. James reporting in The Athletic that we're after, what's his name? Sam Tickle from Wigan. Mr. Tickle in goal is quite an amusing thing.
It's what you need.
Just what you need, those long, stretchy arms. But, they must feel like they have what they need to replace Ramsdale, because, going into a season in the Premier League, in the Champions League, with cup competitions, you need at least one fairly established backup goalkeeper You can't do like Chelsea and have about 7 of them like they have right now. They have about 7 of every player, it seems. But, they must feel confident with such a short period of time left in this window that they've got who they want to come in and be the understudy for David Raya, because I think there is at least clarity in that sense.
Yeah, it has to be. We're all fretting about other positions in the team, but I think you're right. I think it's illustrative that there's something going to happen there. We can't do it. We can't do it without someone else coming in. So I don't know. I think it wouldn't. I imagine the deal's done, right? It's got to be.
You would think so. You would so. You would hope so. I mean, there's talk of Andrew, a 20 million sort of release clause or a 20 million offer just going in. I think we just saw before we started recording Fabrizio Romano saying Arsenal have submitted a 20 million euro package for Joan Garcia. We don't know, what the structure of that is. It says add-ons included, so it could be a relatively small fee with various add-ons on appearances or over a period of time, whatever that might be. I mean, it is basically what we get in for Ramsdale. We're then going to pay straight away for another goalkeeper.
Yeah, which I guess you might scratch your head at a little bit, because it's a reasonable outlay for a goalkeeper who's potentially, again, going to be sitting on the bench. But, who knows with Arteta? Maybe he's already identified this guy as a successor to Raya, another upgrade further down the line. I don't think that's necessarily the case in the short term. But, it's a strange one, isn't it? Because this rumour just appeared out of nowhere from some random Spanish journalist chatting about it I think it was on a Twitch channel or something a couple of months ago. And it was like he said the deal's done, as if, all of the conversations had already taken place. And because Arsenal knew there was a release clause, that they would just go ahead and pay it. And it was just a waiting game.
The release clause, by the way, is 30 million, I think.
Yeah,
so,
it's quite a lot, which would be a record sale for Espanyol. I mean, it's interesting because this guy kind of came to he came to prominence last season in the Spanish second tier. He had a good run in the second half of the season, but it's not like he's got a huge amount of top flight experience. The jump from the Spanish second tier to Premier League is pretty big. He's now played 180 minutes. He kept a clean sheet last night, albeit quite luckily against Atletico Madrid. But it's definitely an interesting one. But again, their scouting network must have been keeping tabs on this guy for a while, so we have to trust it. I do think it's an absolutely. I mean, it must be an unprecedented situation. I mean, if they bring in this guy, that makes it 4 goalkeepers recruited this summer, having released about 5. And potentially there's still being a need for a third goalkeeper as well, because, it's all well and good bringing in an 18-year-old from Ajax, but, if you did need him, that's quite a big step up and a big ask for him. So, we've been consistently linked with slightly more experienced players, haven't we? Like Dan Bentley, the Wolves guy.
Are you a little surprised that, Dan Bentley, 30-year-old goalkeeper with lots of Premier League experience, Wolves were looking for £1 million, Arsenal offered £3.50. Would that, in the context of this summer, maybe what else we need in the team, and we'll come to that obviously, would that deal not have made a bit more sense? There is, I do wonder a bit about our goalkeeping recruitment and how much we've spent over the years and some of the players that we've brought in. Runerson, I know that was a bit of an emergency one last minute where we absolutely needed a second choice goalkeeper because we'd sold Emi Martinez and it was the weird COVID situation. But Matt Turner came in, was never the right profile. We brought Ramsdale in, then decided that we wanted David Raya. There's a lot going on in this goalkeeping department, and it always feels like there's something happening rather than a measure of stability.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's all the more amazing given some of the players who've gone as well. I mean, Martinez, had that period in the team where he thrived at the beginning of Arteta's time in charge. But obviously we had to let him go because we'd made commitments towards Leno, but we wanted to upgrade Leno and we ended up doing that with Ramsdale. But yeah, some of those other deals in between, the Runerson one I think was a real shocker. So bad that we then had to bring in, Matt Ryan from Brighton on loan for half a season to cover for a bit. Matt Turner I just didn't get at any point because he was a guy who openly admitted he couldn't really play out from the back with his feet, which for a team who were trying to make that the backbone of their football style seemed odd. So yeah, I can only hope that we're slightly more on top of things. I think the Setford one that we committed to this summer is interesting because I think he becomes a homegrown player next year if he does a year with us, even though he's a kind of British passport holder because he was on the books at Ajax for a while. So I think there's an advantage there in the longer term. And I think whoever comes in as a third choice, if we do that this summer, it really probably ends up being a very, very short-term thing because either we're going to bring in Carl Hein again after his loan, or we might flog him. I mean, it's a bit of a sort of merry-go-round, isn't it, around there at the moment? But I think the key thing at the moment for me is just praying that David Raya stays fit for a bit while everything else settles down.
Yeah, well,
it's such a fascinating position to recruit for. Probably the most interesting one on the pitch because you're basically hiring someone who isn't going to play.
Yeah.
And how the hell do you sell that? Especially if it's someone who isn't, an obvious third choice. So if you're aiming for a young guy who's got his future ahead of him, but has also been playing, it's not an easy sell.
Yeah, I mean, there is a case, I suppose, you can make that if you are recruiting number two goalkeepers and if you're recruiting young, then, you run the risk of these guys saying, well, look, I want to go and play somewhere. I've played some cup football here. I'm not going to usurp whoever the number one choice is. I need to go and play somewhere else. And that's, I think, a reasonable expectation. I just wonder about some of the goalkeeping recruitment. I did some figures this morning and, as it stands, using Transfermarkt as a guide on fees, I've sort of added up that we've spent 69.5 million euros on goalkeepers since Mikel Arteta arrived. These are the transfers just under Mikel Arteta and Edu. And in the same period, we've spent 79 million pounds on forwards. And I will asterisk that with Kai Havertz being signed as a midfielder because when he was first put onto the Arsenal website, I think he was listed as a midfielder. I think, that was the role that they envisaged for him. I don't think they ruled out him playing as a forward, but, as somebody who would be considered an out-and-out forward, we've got Gabriel Jesus, Leandro Trossard, and I included Marquinhos in that, which was a 3 million signing. And, I think that's been quite generous to Marquinhos there. So it's fascinating to look at the two ends of the pitch and the number of signings and the amount of money that we've spent, in a period when, Jim, people are looking for us to add a little bit more up front and maybe add some firepower. It hasn't been an area where, I'm not saying they're reluctant to spend the money, but they're not willing to spend money unless they really think it's the right way to spend it. Perhaps that would be the right way to put it.
Yeah, it could be. But also I think Arteta hates people trying to second guess him. So he keeps his cards close to his chest. It is an interesting position because I do think, though, that the goalkeeping role is one of the ones on the pitch which is evolving really, really rapidly. And maybe that's part of why we've bought and discarded. And I'd be interested to see as well that 69 million you said, how that compares to other clubs. So because I don't know. But it's weird that you sort of that we've been so seemingly unsure about that position, but it could be related to things like the evolution of the role, but also availability. I don't know. Yeah.
Any thoughts on that, Andrew?
I think a couple of the purchases that we've made, the secondary choice purchases, have been kind of made in a bit of a panic and a sense of we need a body, and we brought those bodies in, and those bodies haven't really been up to the job, and we've automatically thought we can improve. And I did, there were, for a couple of windows there, I was quite suspicious of Iñaki Kanya constantly kind of approaching players that he either already had a connection with or had worked with or something like that. But at the same time, we've recruited Ramsdale, we've recruited Raya. They've been the best goalkeepers in the league for the last 2 years. So you kind of feel like he's built up a little bit of credit. This Juan Garcia guy, if we've been looking at him for a while, you suspect there must be some good vibes around him. I mean, he's a Spain under-21 goalkeeper, and Spain's not a bad football side at international levels. So let's wait and see. I mean, I stand by this absolute, like, the worst thing that could happen to us would be for Raya to get injured early in the season, because I think it would just throw so much up in the air. I don't think we can really afford that, because he brings so much calmness to the team. And if you don't have a Ramsdale to lean on and you're literally just throwing it out to some new guy, that could be that could be quite problematic. I've got someone at the door.
That's all right.
Can I just go and get it? 2 seconds.
Go and get it. We'll have to invent some Andrew Allen doorbell music here. We'll be right back. You're back.
I'm back.
Okay.
Delivery of fizzy water, of all things.
Fizzy water. Wow, how bougie. I'm a sparkling water guy myself. Don't worry about it. I wouldn't.
Good.
I wouldn't judge you on that. Okay, so look, before we come to what else we might need, let's talk a little bit about midfield and the reshaping of midfield. When you look at it, Jim, basically we've had 2 out in Emile Smith-Rowe, who's gone to Fulham, and Fabio Vieira, who's gone on loan to Porto. And we've had 2 in, which is Mikel Merino. And I think we can relatively safely assume that Ethan Nwaneri has been promoted to the first team and is going to take up one of those midfield roles, which, you know, I'm happy about. We talk all the time about how we want young players to come through the academy, how we have to build a pathway for these guys. And if Fabio Vieira is the bridge that Ethan Nwaneri needs to cross to get to the first team, then so be it, right? I think he deserves a chance based on what he's done in pre-season. So are you relatively happy with what we've got in midfield now?
Yeah, I am actually, because I think if you look at those 2 players, Vieira and Smith-Rowe, neither played prominent roles last year. And you're talking about Nwaneri jumping over Vieira. He didn't have to jump too hard. Ultimately, you know, Vieira didn't have a great season, wasn't considered first choice that frequently. So I think that was a no-brainer. And the Merino one, the way I see it, is he's going to be playing much more regularly than either of those, you know, either Vieira or Smith-Rowe. So I think he is the classic example of expanding the depth of the squad or the breadth of the squad, and he will play ahead of, you know, Partey and he might even be able to give Declan Rice a rest. So I think he is a much more prominent player, and so I think we've added to it significantly, because the other 2, rightly or wrongly with Smith-Rowe, you know, he wasn't being considered, and so I think we're very strong and bigger and stronger as well, I think, in that department, which is also really a kind of interesting point.
Yeah,
just getting, you know, more physically capable side.
Someone said to me, I think it was on our Discord today, someone said that we're still only either the 4th biggest or not quite the biggest team, but we're much bigger than we were, which I think is a pertinent point, that this was a team that maybe did lack some physicality. Andrew, Mikel Merino coming in, 6'2", dare we say he has a cultured left foot. He's certainly got a winning smile and he looks the part, and we know what he's all about in terms of how he competes and wins duels and wins the ball and all that kind of stuff. You know, I think he's a very, very interesting signing, the kind of signing that I think you can make when you've already taken your midfield up another level by bringing in someone like Declan Rice the season before. It's not like you can bring in 110 million pound players every summer. That's just not possible. You need to find other ways to augment the team. And I think Merino, in that sense, is a very smart choice. The experience, all of the things that he has, you know, make him sort of ready to go, you know, pretty much straight away, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting watching that interview, the first interview he did with the club website. He speaks very, very confidently, like a player who's had a career already, right? Like, he's not someone who's going to be shaken by these new surroundings, even though I know he's already had experience in the Premier League. But he definitely does seem kind of oven ready. Very, very Edu-like profile, I think. This guy who's capable of winning challenges in the midfield, but also might get you a goal or be creative in the final third. Physically robust. I think he could be really, really interesting. I think he's mature enough to recognise that maybe at this point he might not be first choice, but he definitely will back himself to make it into the team on a regular basis, I reckon. I think in general, midfield looks pretty strong. I mean, I think like a lot of people, I guess I'm surprised that Thomas Partey's still there. But with Jorginho and Mourinho and Rice, the reliance on him is nowhere near what it was 2 years ago. If there's a slight concern for me, it's we don't really have a backup for Martin Ødegaard. I don't know how much you can have a backup for Martin Ødegaard because he's just so good, but we are going to be looking at him being the creative hub, and it's going to be difficult to take him off in games or to rest him for games because there is no Smith Rowe, there is no Vieira, there is not really anyone in the squad who I would sort of identify as an obvious number 10. At the same time, I feel relatively comfortable that the team can be rejigged to find that creativity in other spaces. But yeah, you're always going to be a little bit nervous about that. Again, it's a bit like when someone's that good, how do you recruit to have someone sit on the bench? We've obviously struggled to do that with Saka. You've seen the problems at goalkeeper. But yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty well-rounded midfield now. Yeah,
maybe Jim Vieira was that guy, someone that they brought in who they thought could potentially understudy Martin Ødegaard, and just the quality that he has and the consistency and the availability that he has made it very difficult for Vieira to get opportunities in there. So I wonder if, coming back to Nwaneri, if he is the guy. Like if you're picking a team now without Martin Ødegaard in it, who do you pick in his place? Who do you put in that position? There are ways. I think we've even seen Kai Havertz play there a couple of times, and he's obviously a very versatile guy, but I don't think that's really, he brings different things to that role than Martin Ødegaard does. So, without putting too much pressure on Nwaneri, it might well be that he is the guy that they've earmarked to... if we're winning a game relatively well and it's 70, 75 minutes, we can put Nwaneri on for Ødegaard, cup games, those kinds of things. Like, I don't know. I don't know what the plan is, and maybe I'm getting ahead of myself here. But in terms of profile, he seems to be the most analogous to Ødegaard based on the players that we have available in this midfield.
Yeah, and like you say, they've made room for him. So they clearly rate him as ready. And, the fact he's very, very young, it didn't sort of hinder Saka. So, I think you're right. I think he will get probably more game time than we imagined, but it's also a big burden. You don't want to put too much pressure on him to be the guy that needs to create and run and be the metronome in the same way that Ødegaard does. So it's a big ask. But actually, he is a really interesting player because he's a bit of an unknown. Let's be honest, and I think they are making way and paving the way for him to have a big impact. So it'll be fascinating to see how much time he actually gets. Because the other thing about Ødegaard is I don't want to tempt fate here, but he's been pretty good, pretty robust from a health perspective. So, you don't really know how much time he will be off the pitch. But Nwaneri is one that really, really fascinates me this year.
Do you think, Andrew, you might have seen the video a couple of weeks ago where Ødegaard and Nwaneri were talking and about making their debut at such a young age, and Ødegaard moved to Real Madrid at 15, Nwaneri made his debut for Arsenal at 15, and there's been some chat about how he has been mentoring Nwaneri off the pitch in terms of how you come to terms with the level of I suppose hype maybe, or expectation or whatever, when you are that young and you become the youngest debutant for a football club like Arsenal, there is a spotlight sort of trained on you straight away. And it might not be the biggest, it might not be the strongest, it might not be the brightest at first, but obviously as time goes on, that is something that you're going to have to deal with. So I do wonder if that sort of, what they've created there with the relationship between those two might be part of the way they're thinking about how these two guys are operating within the squad, sort of simpatico as not as competitors, if you like, but certainly if you're trying to get Nwaneri up to speed with what Martin Odegaard does, who better to sort of have him under his wing than Martin Odegaard?
I mean, I think as an example to follow, Odegaard's pretty interesting, isn't he? I mean, he's had a very unique story, I think. And Nwaneri being kind of coming through the Arsenal academy, I guess there's more synergies there with a Saka or an Nketiah or something like that. You know, guys who kind of stayed in the same environment and kind of grow, level up, level up.
Your face is a mess.
Yeah, and I think he's got plenty of examples in that squad of people who've come through at a young age and had to deal with a lot of pressure and to deal with that pressure in very different ways. You know, I guess Saliba moved for big money at 18 to Arsenal and had to bide his time, but there was a lot of focus on what he might bring to the team and a lot of kind of interest in how he was going to develop. And it wasn't a linear journey. And I think assuming that it's going to be a linear journey for Nwaneri is probably a little naive, because we've seen how up and down these things can go. But they are putting quite a few eggs in his basket. And I guess we probably shouldn't forget Miles Lewis-Skelly as well. I think he's a really interesting profile, and while they've been testing him out at left back, it's pretty clear we've got 30 left backs in the squad. So he traditionally, or at least in the academy days, was more of a midfield player. So maybe there's some room for him to develop there, even though it looks like he's been kind of honed a little bit more as a defender recently. But I mean, I'm excited. I think kind of trying to integrate the academy guys is something that we maybe lost our way a little bit with in the last 2 years while we were just desperately trying to close the gap on Manchester City. I think we've manoeuvred some room in the squad now to do this, and I think it's a good thing. I think Arteta will have been hurt by the idea that we were, or the criticism that we were somehow losing youngsters because he wasn't providing a pathway for them. And I get it. You have to wait until they're good enough, and they have to be good enough to deliver in a team which is better. But I'm excited. It gives me a reason to go to those League Cup games again. With a little some new edge.
Yeah, Bolton. Is it Bolton at home in the Carabao Cup? So that's the kind of game where I think you can potentially play with a few younger players, and obviously there's a fairly deep squad defensively, which we haven't needed to talk about because I don't think anybody can. There's no need to say anything about our defensive depth, Jim, because it's just so massive. So all the attention turns to the other end of the pitch. And if we talk about having 2 out, 2 in midfield, based on what we had last season, which I think we have to acknowledge was very, very good from an attacking perspective, we are one light if and when Eddie Nketiah's move to Crystal Palace goes through. So first, quick thought on Eddie and what's next for him and how you view his time at Arsenal. But then how important is it for Arsenal to do something before tomorrow night's deadline? If we are going to look at it as a kind of 1 out, 1 in kind of thing, can we afford to go into a season with one fewer attacker than we had last time, even if, in the second half of the season, Eddie didn't really play a lot and didn't score a goal after December?
I think that, starting with Eddie, I think he is a really good finisher, and he scored some crucial goals for us, but like you say, he never quite cemented his place, even after a kind of run of good form. So it feels like an obvious step for him and probably quite a good move. But we are losing goals as a result, even if they tailed off towards the end of last season. I don't know. I mean, Man City would argue you don't always need more than one striker, but they do have a complete freak of nature up front. So it does worry me a bit, especially because Jesus' injury record is pretty poor, and again he's injured again. So I would obviously like to see, and the other thing is that I think Havertz has proved a lot of doubters wrong. Me, not least me, but I don't see him scoring a huge amount of goals. I mean, what did he get last year? 13, something like that. Maybe if he could get 15, 16, 17 goals, that's a pretty decent return. But so yeah, I would love to see someone else coming in to give us a little bit more variety and depth in that position.
Do you have some worries, Andrew, about our attacking depth? The lineup, I suppose, if you look at it, is Saka, Jesus, Havertz, Trossard, Martinelli, and Reece Nelson, who at the time of recording is still there. I don't really expect him to go anywhere. There haven't been any links. I'm sure Arsenal would like to sell. I'm sure he would like to go, but we're at a point in the window now where it becomes increasingly difficult to let players go unless you're 100% sure you can get somebody in. But, Reece Nelson, one Premier League start in 4 years, hasn't scored a lot of goals, doesn't really strike me as the kind of player who you take off the bench when you need a goal. I think there is potentially a role for him this season, in that if you're winning a game like we were winning the game at Aston Villa on Saturday, and it's 2-0 up and there's 5 minutes to go, and you just want to take Saka off to make sure he doesn't get a clatter in the last 5 minutes or doesn't go over on his ankle or whatever, that kind of a role I think is fine for Reece Nelson. I think that 15, 20-minute cameo thing when a game is won, perfect. But I don't see him as a player who can, I know the Bournemouth moment aside, he's not really a player who comes on and you feel confident in let's say the way Trossard comes off the bench, you go, well, we've got a chance here with this guy. Like if you're desperately looking for goals, I don't have a lot of faith in Reece Nelson in that sense. So, what are your thoughts on what Arsenal ought to do? And I think everybody's probably on the same page here. It's like, bring somebody in, but what Arsenal will do, or you think they will do, between now and Friday night at 11 p.m.
I mean, I think they'll be looking around the window quite keenly, trying to strengthen if they can find something. I mean, my issue at the moment is if you've got Saka, Havertz, Martinelli, even Jesus all on the pitch as starters, which is possible if Havertz was playing as a left 8. Where's your Hail Mary? Where's your throw the kitchen sink option when we're losing, late on in games? And if it's, Trossard is great. We know that Trossard can grab you a goal. But again, I don't have a huge amount of faith in Reece Nelson to necessarily be that guy on a consistent basis. And I do think we're potentially a body light. I think the fact that we tried to go for Sesko at the beginning of the window, as opportunistic as that was, that probably would have represented a 1-in, 1-out with Eddie, and then we might have utilized some other some other money to would have used it differently in midfield potentially. But I'm a little bit nervous. I'm always nervous because, you love to be able to look at the bench and think, okay, worst case scenario, let's chuck on a few guys at the end, like Wenger used to do, the classic kind of Kanu, Wiltord, Suker, whoever it was, just throw as much firepower on the pitch as possible, crowd the area, and hopefully one of them will do something magic. Maybe we won't be in a situation where we have to do that too often. Hopefully games will be won and we'll be 3-4-0 up and whenever. But I have found it kind of variously amusing over the course of the last couple of days, seeing links with Darwin Núñez or the Ivan Toney rumor coming up again, or this type of thing. I mean, I don't know whether it's just if it's the media lacking kind of imagination, or if it's if there's anything actually in these. Is it a case of we're just trying to go for big boys FC, and any big lad over the 6 foot who plays striker is an option and Arsenal might be interested? It's very hard to tell at the moment. The window is so crowded with real rumours and nonsense and all the usual guff that goes with the last 48 hours of transfer window. I've always said all summer I would like us to buy another attacking player. I mean, Nico Williams was always the one, wasn't it? From the moment the Euros started, everyone went, God, that would be he'd be good, wouldn't he? He'd fit right in with us. And it's never really looked like being an option, even if you crowdfund a briefcase.
Yeah, even if you do that. I mean, Jim, is there a possibility, and we've seen it maybe before, that Arsenal, and I'm just sort of playing devil's advocate here because I'm with you and I'm with Andrew in that I think, to let Eddie go and not bring anyone else in leaves us too light in attack over the course of a season. I know there's a January window, but there's a lot of football to play between now and then, and there are Champions League games and all the cup games. I think we're too light, to let Eddie go, even if he was a bit part player, and not bring anyone in. I would be, I'm not going to say I'm going to go crazy or be unhappy, but I would really like to see that gap in the squad being filled, because it is a gap in the squad if he's come in, even if we do have all the left backs in the world. Just to play devil's advocate, though, is there the possibility that maybe Arsenal are determined to bring in a specific player who may not be available in this window, therefore they're not going to spend money on anyone because they're playing a longer game? And look, that has worked out in the past, but there's also the need to win now, and I think Arsenal are in a position where we're not necessarily building towards something anymore. I think we're kind of at the point where we need to get ourselves over the line. Therefore, that's why that kind of a signing or an attacking signing feels almost imperative in this particular window to give us a better chance of getting that extra 2 points or 3 points or 4 points or whatever it might be, 5 goals, 3 goals, who knows, over the course of the season that could help us go one better against, Manchester City or whoever else is competing for the Premier League.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because I think you're right. I think we are trying to do what we can to get over the line. But the fact, if they are waiting for the right person, then it just goes to show that they're not in a giant hurry, if you see what I mean. Maybe they are prepared to wait another 6 months or another year even, and then go again. But yes, it feels like an obvious addition to me. But like you say, when as Andrew said, throwing around names like Darwin Núñez and Tony, there's not a lot out there that's obvious. And he would maybe the other counter argument from Arteta is, look, we scored an absolute truckload of goals last year, so we can survive with what we've got. And maybe he has a point.
I mean, the other sort of thing to mention on that is that I think if everybody is fit, I think we do have a fairly decent attacking lineup, Jim, if everybody is fit. But we have seen, of course, Gabriel Jesus struggle with injury over the past 18 months. If he stays 100% fit, you've got a left winger, you've got a 9, you've got a right winger. You've got someone who can play that Saka backup role that everybody is, desperate to take some of the burden off Bukayo Saka. I think maybe not the only people, but, two of the people who don't want to take any burden off Bukayo Saka are Mikel Arteta and Bukayo Saka, because I think he wants to play, and I think Arteta would play Saka anytime he could. So the desire that we have to have that Saka backup, isn't maybe shared within the squad itself. But, the Jesus injury thing does make it a bit more of a risk to not bring anyone else in, if that is the case.
Yeah, and also going back to the Saka point, I'm sure Saka obviously wants to play every second of every game, and Arteta would like him to as well. But I think if you look at the tail end of last season, he did look tired, and I think there will be other people in Arteta's ear just saying, look, I think we need more options here to protect him. So especially because as we see with Man City, they kind of grind into gear and just hit top gear just at the time when we don't want our players to be tired. So I think as much as he might want to play all the games and Arteta would like to play him, I mean, obviously he would. Why wouldn't he? I think having someone who can come in and give him a break is actually really, really important.
Do you see that player within the squad, Andrew? Is it Gabriel Jesus Is he that guy who can fill that role? Because he did it a couple of times last season. I think he played on the right against Manchester City in the home game. I could be wrong, but has played there. But again, it's that fitness issue with Jesus, isn't it? Like one game into the new season, he's got a little bit of a groin problem, which was reportedly not serious. Fingers crossed that's the case. But it's sort of in one way timely, if you're looking at the ability to bring somebody in another way, quite untimely, because you want him to, to stay fit and to build his match fitness and sharpness over the course of the start of the season.
Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't know how serious this injury to Jesus is, but the mere fact that he's spent the entire summer trying to get fit or get back to the top level off the back of struggling with this ongoing knee issue, to have a full pre-season and then within, days of the season starting to be struggling again with something else is, as far as I'm concerned, huge alarm bells ringing. You can't, it's just really difficult to ignore that, because he just doesn't have the reliability factor that everybody else does, or some of the other players do in the squad. I mean, I think, honestly, if you said to me, having gone so close to winning the title last year against Manchester City, that this year we try again, but actually we take one player away from the attack rather than add anybody in, and then say that will get us over the line this time. I mean, it just makes me a little bit nervous, I guess. But let's see. Maybe they've got something up their sleeve. But I don't think you can rely on Jesus, though. I mean, he may well bring that. Whether or not he even wants to play wide is a question I think needs to be asked, because he obviously was brought in from Manchester City, having been shuffled out wide over there, and was desperate to play as a central striker. And now that Havertz has emerged as a real option as the central guy, Jesus is obviously going to be asking questions about, whether or not he's in the right place necessarily. And I'm sure he'll do a job for the team if he's called upon and he's fit and he does play there. But it's not ideal, I don't think.
No, I don't worry about that aspect of it. If Gabriel Jesus is told to play on the right or the left, that's where he should play. I don't think he's got any divine right, as it were. Even if he was brought in as a 9, Jim, he's never. I mean, he was really, really good in that period until he got injured at the World Cup. That first season, he was really, really good. But, he doesn't have the sort of history of saying, right, I deserve to play at number 9. 1, he doesn't stay fit. 2, the finishing leaves a bit to be desired. And I like Jesus. I think he's a really, really good player. And I think, as I said, if he does stay fit, he brings us something across that front 3 in all of those positions that would be really, really useful. But I don't worry too much about what he wants. Like, if he gets a run at 9 and, stays fit and scores a load of goals, let's bring it on, I say. Let's have that. But until such time as he can do that, I don't think he's got, the ability to make any demands.
I don't think any player has the divine right. I think it never. I don't think it's a great move for any player to start insisting, it's all right here. I don't mind playing here, but I just think when you're a player, you take your chances and you play whichever position you're told to play in. And I think, to be fair to him, he doesn't say anything other than that. So I think he's more than happy to play anywhere, frankly, especially after last season. Final
question for both of you then, a very quick one. I know there aren't too many names doing the rounds right now. I've seen Kingsley Coman mentioned. That feels like, late window compromise, everything. There's a guy who just can't stay fit anyway. I don't know that that's something that Arsenal would bring in. But starting with you, Jim, if you had to put, a hard-earned fiver on the table now to say, will Arsenal bring anybody in, yes or no? Where are you putting your money?
In that position, I don't think so. I just don't think it. I think I would like it to happen as previously discussed. I just can't see it.
Okay, Andrew?
I don't see it. I feel like there'd be more smoke at this point than there is, and everything that's being touted all seems a bit
speculative,
newspaper fodder. I think it's just who's available. The rumours are probably being, for any agents out there, this is prime time. Just chuck in Arsenal as a name as you try and get a bit of press for your guy who's available and might be looking for a last-ditch move. I think Arsenal will have had a list for a very, very long time, and they'll have been working to that list. And I'd be very, very surprised if, given the circumstances and the way the summer's gone, it's not like we've had a really, really bad injury right on the on the start of the season, unless Jesus is terrible, we don't know. But I feel like they won't deviate from the script, and anything at this point would probably be a deviation unless it was a real superstar became available for next to nothing.
Yeah, I have to agree, I think, with both of you. I think unless there is something being hatched in complete secrecy in some kind of underground London Colney bunker, it's very difficult to see anything happening before 11 o'clock tomorrow night. But, as we know, things can change and things can happen very quickly. So we'll keep fingers crossed that apart from spending a load of money on 2 more goalkeepers, we do actually bring in another attacker before the end of the window. But look, we better leave it there. Jim, as ever, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Andrew, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed to Andrew and to Jim. And let's hope, I'm keeping everything crossed, that we are the 3 wrong men, not the 3 wise men, the 3 completely wrong men, and that Arsenal do add somebody before the deadline tomorrow evening at 11 p.m. At this point, it looks difficult. I don't know who it could be at this point, but maybe they've got something up their sleeves and we'll have a nice surprise before 11 p.m. tomorrow night. This weekend, of course, we play Brighton. For more on that game and for, I suppose, fingers crossed, further developments in the transfer market, you can join us over on Patreon tomorrow afternoon. We will have our usual Premier League preview podcast for you. That should be out mid to late afternoon. If you'd like to get on board to get instant access to that and everything else that we do on Patreon, for just $6 a month, you can sign up at patreon.com/Arseblog. That is patreon.com/Arseblog. Right, I'm going to race and get this edited and uploaded and out for all of you. For now, take it easy, folks, and we will catch you on the next one. Until then, cheers, bye-bye.